The Miami Dolphins' initial 53-man roster was revealed this afternoon with some unique quirks. And if you're a little worried, I'd encourage you to take a page out of the Aaron Rodgers book and RELAX. Relax.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, Miami. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL Draft League for 33rd Team. You can find all of our shows here on the Locked On Network on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Dolphins made their 53 cuts, and we kind of previewed it last week. These cuts were going to be hard. There were hard decisions to make. There were players you didn't want to let go. There was going to be challenging adjustments for position rooms. And all of that was realized and manifested as the cuts start coming, and you find out that UDFA corner Isaiah Johnson doesn't make the cut, and UDFA standout tight end Hayden Rusi doesn't make the cut, and the team already made a decision on Jody Fortson at tight end, and these cuts come throughout the day, and then 4 o'clock comes and goes, and we know most of the cuts, but not all the cuts, and then the Dolphins released their initial 53-man roster, and their words, not mine, initial 53-man roster. And it is initial because, well, for starters, you have just 4 wide receivers on the current 53. Odell Beckham placed on the PUP. He'll miss the first 4 weeks of the season. You have 2 specialists. You don't have a long snapper. The Dolphins cut Jake Ferguson amongst the cuts to get to 53 and get compliant. There was a slew of linebackers on the edge. They do keep a undrafted free agent at corner in Storm Duck. Lots to digest and get into. You can start with the biggest surprises. I think 4 wide receivers is front row center. The Dolphins waiving Eric Ezukanma, former 4th-round draft pick, showed promise but hasn't been healthy and wasn't healthy again after kind of a breakout in the second preseason game. Has a good practice against Washington. Boom, he's at a boot. The Dolphins now carrying 4. Braxton Berrios, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Malik Washington. That's it. Because Odell's on the PUP. You had River Craycraft placed on the injured reserve, designated to return. He will return at some point this season. And obviously, Ezukanma doesn't make it. Now, that comes in part, they kept a 4th running back, and they kept the 4th tight end. Tanner Connor makes it along with Julian Hill, Jonnu Smith, Durham Smythe, and Jeff Wilson Jr. makes it along with Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, and then obviously Alec Ingold. So the skill group is pretty balanced. 4 backs, 4 wide receivers, 4 tight ends, a fullback. That's a surprise. I also don't think that's sustainable. And I think that's an important initial reminder. You look at this roster, you look at the numbers, you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. How are they going to do that? Because every other team just went through the whole process. And I did a show earlier today that outlined players that were cut or being released or available for trade that moved the needle for me. And you know where I found the most available talent? Wide receiver. Now, Barry Jackson of the Herald is reporting that the Dolphins are interested in bringing back Ezukanma. Obviously, you have Craycraft and Odell on the IR and PUP respectively. They'll miss at least 4 games before they're able to rejoin the active roster as per the rules. Odell started the training camp period on the PUP so he could stay on the PUP and get carried through. And with the IR to return rules, you're allowed 2 players to be placed on injured reserve would proactively designated to return. Any other players that get put on IR today, you have to designate they're an IR to return, which you only get 2 of, or they're IR and their season is over type of players. And that's an important note here, because I look at some of the other names that made the 53, and then I look at the numbers composition across the roster, and I would expect tomorrow at some point, the Dolphins are probably going to place additional player or players on injured reserve and open spots back up to add an additional wide receiver to the mix. This is just as much as anything else for the Dolphins. This cut down period was them identifying who are the most desirable pieces that we have that we do not want to expose to risk of being plucked and signed somewhere else. And let's protect those players. And that included Patrick McMorris, who at the preseason game against Tampa Bay had his foot in a walking boot. Could that be an IR player? And if you place him on injured reserve after today, you place him moving forward on injured reserve, you don't have to designate whether he's to return or not, right? It gives you a little bit more flexibility. You think about Anthony Walker hasn't practiced all that much. Is he a candidate for IR? Benito Jones has been down for a while. He hasn't practiced all that much, especially the last couple of weeks. Tanner Connor got banged up, didn't participate this past week. They have options for players to designate for injured reserve and then open spots back up to add a 5th wide receiver or sign a long snapper, because they don't have one right now. And everybody's freaking out. We're not playing Jacksonville tomorrow. That's the whole thing for me. But it is a surprise to look at wide receivers, see 4 names: Hill, Waddle, Washington, and Berrios. See just as many tight ends as you do wide receivers. At corner, Cam Smith goes on IR. He is the other IR to return player. I don't know that it's necessarily a huge surprise that Storm Duck made it if you opened up a 6th corner spot, but I'm surprised that they kept 5 safeties and 6 corners. That's 11 DBs. That's a big number. I'm surprised they kept that many. And then you add Cam Smith to the mix, and it's technically 12. And that doesn't include Nick Needham, who we found out got cut. Doesn't include the aforementioned Isaiah Johnson, who I was a really big fan of. We'll see if they get him back on the practice squad. But Miami choosing of the 2 UDFAs to go Storm Duck and then choosing to prioritize Patrick McMorris for what he showed in the 2 preseason games, holding on to his rights. Because if you put him on waivers and he gets claimed, somebody else picks up a full 4-year contract at 6th round pick financial implications. That could be a big loss. Oh, did they learn the lesson this year from what they did last year with Elijah Higgins? Remember, Elijah Higgins popped in preseason. Everybody got all excited about Elijah Higgins. Well, they waived him and tried to push him through, and lo and behold, guess what happened? He got claimed by Arizona, and they lost him. So I'll give them kudos for finding a way to keep it work with Patrick McMorris, who obviously did pop quite a bit for the Dolphins in the preseason. So some names outgoing. Who might we see back? Who are likely names to be back? There was another undrafted free agent who made this team, who we're going to give him his flowers to next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. So make sure that you stick with us. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, but we have something a little different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's number one sportsbook. Round of applause for Andrew Meyer, center out of UTEP, makes the team. And it's not a shoo-in. It's not a guarantee. But nonetheless, it is an accomplishment on this roster to be an undrafted free agent like a Storm Ducker and Andrew Meyer to make it all the same. Now, Andrew Meyer plays center, a center exclusive player. The Dolphins have a lot of flexibility. So for them to have gone out of their way and add a non-positionally flexible player as an undrafted free agent to the offensive line, that is a very big feather in Andrew Meyer's cap. He should feel very proud of that accomplishment. And I think it speaks volume to what this team thinks of him as a player, because they covet everywhere positional versatility. I asked Mike McDaniel about that in training camp, and he says, you got to give guys the opportunity and earn the right to make the team, and the way that they do that is providing value in multiple spots. Andrew Meyer doesn't really do that, but he's on this team nonetheless, along with Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Kendall Lamb, Patrick Paul, Aaron Brewer, Jack Driscoll, Lee Michelberg, Lester Cotton, Robert Jones, and Andrew Meyer. Isaiah Wynn going on the PUP list because he started training camp on the PUP. So you have 11 offensive linemen, 10 on the active 53, including an undrafted free agent who plays center. And for a lot of the snap issues that Miami had early in camp, Meyer was a part of that. Him and Ireland Brown and Aaron Brewer, to be fair, all three of them had their issues early on. But the way that he really came on and showcased athleticism and getting out in space and getting up to the second level, it's a really intriguing ad. And it is a bit of a surprise, again, just because what he plays and what he doesn't play, and he doesn't bring a lot of value anywhere else. Now, I think there's something to be said, and I know Alf Artega over 3 yards per carry has made this point. If you can now avoid your center going out and changing multiple spots along the offensive line to reallocate guys and get guys figured out, that's a win. Now, can your sixth offensive lineman really, truly, honestly be a utility guy who can play any of the other spots? Yeah. But if the center goes down, you have a center that could come in and play. You don't have to take your starting guard and move them over, and now you get worse, air quotes, in 2 spots because you have to take your guard and move the center and then take your backup guard and play him at guard. Who else could be back? One player I'm very confident is going to be back, barring anything unforeseen, is Blake Ferguson, the team's long snapper. Because he signed an extension for several years, this time last year. But here's where it comes down to risk assessment, asset management, and strategy. You can cut Patrick McMorris, just like you cut Elijah Higgins last year, and say, we think we'll get him back. We should be fine. And not. And you lose that player, and you lose 4 years of control on a rookie contract for that player. Or you can keep the player and say, everybody's got a long snapper. Blake Ferguson has a pre-existing contract with finances that we don't think is going to get claimed. And if he doesn't get claimed, we will bring him right back and sign him after we put somebody else on injured reserve or we make another move. Because we can only designate 2 guys for IR return on cutdown day. The other guys have to come later. And I think there's some hints with who got put as the designated IR return guys. I was talking to somebody and said, yeah, I don't really love your 4th wide receiver and your 5th corner being already 2 of your 8 IR return players that you get. Throughout the course of a season, you can put 8 guys on IR and pull them back onto the active roster. And I think that's valid. But wouldn't it make sense to put the most important players as the players proactively designated as IR for return? So I think that hints well that whether it's Aaron Brewer with the cut on his hand or Benito Jones with whatever he's dealing with, those guys are penciled in as starters for respective roles for your team. If you know that guy can't go for the next month, if you know it, that's the most important player you would have. That would be the one you'd burn the no-brainer on and say, well, I know we're unfortunately going to have to accommodate this player being on injured reserve because he's a starter. Makes you think those injury questions that exist or situations, whatever verbiage you want to use, presumably is not month-long windows and hopefully short-term windows where they can go for the season opener. And the next guys that go on, whether that's Anthony Walker as linebacker 4, or Patrick McMorris, who is in a boot, as safety number 5, or potentially is Tanner Connor still banged up as tight end 4. Those positions are less important, so they don't proactively get designated right from the jump as IR to return players that you know you're burning 2 of your 8 spots on. You want to use the 2 out of 8 on the most important players that you have that are hurt, right? That's how I view it. That doesn't mean that's exactly how it's going to work out, but as I'm trying to think of what is going to happen next, that is where my head goes. But unless Blake Ferguson gets signed somewhere else to be their long snapper, he's going to be back. It's been reported that a number of players like Hayden Rusi, like Mark Perry, the safety, undrafted free agent, like Eric Ezukama at wide receiver, the team aspires to get those players back off of waivers. And the volume of guys that weren't claimed that were claimed last year really wasn't that high. It was like an average of 1 player per team. I think the good news for Miami is that the law of averages says the vast majority of these guys you will be able to push through. The bad news is last year they had 2 players claimed off waivers that they wanted to get back. They wanted to get Ryan Hayes back last year. They wanted to get Elijah Higgins back last year. They didn't get either one. That's the curse of being a talented team with depth. But those are the kinds of players that I expect to be back. Now, for Chris Brooks at running back, there were fans of the team that was hoping that he would make it over Jeff Wilson. He's in concussion protocol. Was designated as an injury cut. If he clears waivers, he reverts back to the Miami Dolphins injured reserve list, and his season is over because he was cut on cut down day and not designated as a IR return player. They could, of course, then negotiate an injury settlement with him that would release him from the roster. There would be a blackout period, and then he could theoretically sign and play somewhere else this season after a settlement, or he could just ride out the entire season on injured reserve and then come back again for 2025. A lot of moving parts, which is why I encourage you all to relax. The whole timeline's all stressed out. They didn't add any offensive linemen. They cut the long snapper. Who's going to snap the ball? Are we just going to go for 2 all the time? We only have 4 wide receivers. It's okay. It's an initial 53. And they'll make more moves. If I had to guess, you probably have at least 5 corresponding moves in the next 24 hours. Between waiver claims, player re-signings, injured reserve designations that then open roster spots so that you can go sign somebody else to your active roster, trades, whatever. There's a lot more coming, and it sets the table to be really fun. And we'll talk about a few of those things as we bring this episode of Locked On Dolphins reacting to the initial 53 to a close. Stick with us. If I had to guess, looking at the 53, here are the numbers that I think are very likely to see transpire. I think the most likely thing to happen at quarterback, which is Tua Tagovailoa and Skylar Thompson right now, I think the most likely thing to happen is Mike White signs to the practice squad as one of your tenured players. You get 6 of them that you can put on the practice squad. And then for the immediate future, they'll carry him as the 3rd quarterback, and he will elevate on game days, and that'll get you through the first month of the season. And then you figure out if you want to elevate Mike White or do something else. At running back, it's Mostert, Achane, Wright, Jeff Wilson, Alec Ingold. That group feels pretty set to me. I think Chris Brooks will clear waivers, and I think he will revert back to injured reserve. I think that's the thing that happens next. At wide receiver, they're going to add somebody. And I don't think it's just Ezukama back to practice squad. Now, I think this is a nice omen for them to run some more 12 personnel. at least early in the season. Because if you go pecking order of Dolphins skill players in general, even if you had Odell Beckham here, I still think the pecking order is Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane. Then is it wide receiver 3? Is it Jonnu Smith first and then wide receiver 3 after that? Like you're talking about the first guy you're missing in the pecking order is like your 6th guy. So I don't really see a lot of huge concern there. I think the touches will get distributed between Achane and Jonnu. Totally fine early in the season. But they will add someone at wide receiver, whether that's a Noah Brown like we talked about earlier today or somebody else. At tight end, I really feel like they're set there, especially if Tanner Connor's healthy, and I think he'll get some run on special teams. On the offensive line, I would not be surprised to see them make a claim somewhere. They're carrying 11 guys in total. Whether it is Lester Cotton, can you find a trade partner for Liam Eichenberg at a contract year and get cheaper there? Your cut option is either going to be Cotton, Driscoll, Eichenberg, or Rob Jones. I think Cotton's the most probable to be cut. I think Eichenberg's the most likely to be traded because of his positional flexibility. And that's the team that's the player I think the team would be most incentivized to move, especially now that you have a backup center. If that's Liam Eichenberg's whole appeal, can you get a dance partner there? I don't know. But I could see them bringing somebody in off of waivers, but it'd have to be the right player with experience, I think, of the scheme. At defensive tackle, it's Campbell, Hand, Benito Jones, Brandon Peely, Zach Sealer. That group feels pretty solid. I'd be surprised if you don't see at least, whether it's Isaiah Mack or Jonathan Harris, Neville Gallimore, one of those guys or multiple of those guys put back on the practice squad, and then you can shuffle and juggle which one of those guys you elevate, and it could probably get you through half a season. Your linebackers, of course, they looped in all of the edge guys and stacked backers together, but you have Quentin Bell, Jordan Brooks, Muhammad Kamara, David Long, Emmanuel Agba, Jalen Phillips, Duke Riley, Chop Robinson, Channing Tindall, Anthony Walker. That's 10 guys. Walker on IR? Maybe. I don't know of anybody else actively dealing with any injury stuff. I think the one that's on the least sturdy footing as far as if they make a claim and they want to make a cut would be Quentin Bell. Bradley Chubb obviously looming on PUP. Would not be surprised if he's back relatively shortly after the 4-week period that he's required to stay on the PUP after being carried over onto that. At corner, Cam Smith, 4 weeks, IR designated to return. Would be surprised based off us knowing it's a hamstring issue if he is on IR for much longer than that. The dust will presumably settle somewhere else. I don't think they'll go out and get another corner other than for the practice squad. And then at safety, they kept 5. Campbell, Holland, May, McMorris, Poyer. You keeping 5? How hurt is McMorris? Put him on IR? Hard to say. I don't think they'll add there, but they'll definitely add a long snapper as well. So I think you probably have 1 or 2 IR designations. You probably have 1 or 2 player signings. Maybe you have a trade. It's going to be a busy reacclimation window. It'll be fascinating to see if they pick up a third quarterback too. So that just means we're just on the next chapter, and we're going to keep this train rolling along. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I appreciate you guys checking out the show as we give our knee-jerk reactions to the Dolphins' initial 53-man roster. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. We're out of here.